Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Mulcahy and I'm here to talk to you today about ceilings and floors. So ceilings and floors are related to shortages and surpluses. So if you haven't watched the video on shortages and surpluses, you should probably do that first. Otherwise, this might be a little bit confusing. The connection between shortages, surpluses, ceilings, and floors is that ceilings and floors are permanent situations, while shortages and surpluses are temporary situations. So that means when our market is in disequilibrium and our number of buyers does not equal our number of sellers or products, in a shortage or surplus situation, the market will correct itself and return to equilibrium. In a ceiling and floor situation, that is not possible, so we have a permanent shortage or surplus. So your question probably is, why is it like that? Why is one permanent and the other one temporary? And the answer is the government. So the government sets a ceiling or a floor, and by doing that, it interferes with the market. And it does that to help either the buyers of a product or the sellers of the product, depending on where they set that price. So the government either sets that price that's going to be higher than the equilibrium price, or they set it to be lower than the equilibrium price. And depending on what they do, that will determine your ceiling or your floor. Now, the thing that gets kind of confusing is that ceilings and floors refer to things that you guys are very familiar with. However, ceilings and floors are not located on a graph where they are in the room. What they do is they kind of mimic what the purpose of a ceiling or a floor is. So the purpose of a ceiling is to prevent prices from going higher. So let's look at that first. Okay, so a ceiling is intended to help the buyer. And what helps buyers is having lower prices. So the ceiling is going to keep the price low for buyers. So our ceiling is going to be set at a price below our equilibrium. And just the way that a ceiling prevents you from going through the top of the room, a floor prevents the price from going any higher. So as you can see, the price is trying to rise up to reach the equilibrium price, and the ceiling is going to stop that price from rising. And since that price is unable to be changed, that's what causes our permanent shortage. So let's take a look at it on the graph. So here's the market price and the equilibrium quantity for a product. If we have our price ceiling that's set below the equilibrium price, it prevents price from rising, so you have a situation in which the number of buyers is much greater than your number of products or your number of sellers, which causes a shortage. So that shortage is permanent. Now floors help the sellers. And what's going to be true about a price that helps the sellers? Well, a price that helps sellers is always going to be higher than the equilibrium. So a floor is going to be set higher than the equilibrium to help those sellers. So in this case, the equilibrium price is down here, and the price is not able to fall below the level that the floor is on. So the floor interferes with the ability of the price to get low enough to reach that equilibrium. So the floor is always going to be above, and it impacts what price it is. To give you an idea of what a very common floor is, minimum wage is a very common floor. It's a minimum of how much a worker can earn. Another example of that would be for a lot of agricultural products. They usually have a minimum price that they're able to get, and the price doesn't fall below that because of government law. So let's take a look at this on the graph. So here's our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity, and our price floor is set above that equilibrium price and quantity. at that really high price, we have more products for sale than buyers, which is where we get our permanent surplus. Now, since price can't fall low enough to equilibrium, we have a permanent surplus. Now, one thing that you should know is that there's a really important variation on ceilings and floors that talks about effective versus ineffective ceilings and floors. An effective floor or ceiling is one that actually helps either the buyers or the sellers, so it's something that actually interferes with equilibrium, and the price is going to be stuck at a level where it cannot reach equilibrium. So, in effect, an effective floor is doing its job. An ineffective ceiling or floor does the opposite. So what that means is that the price is set either too high or too low compared to the equilibrium price, and it does not interfere with the market reaching equilibrium. So even though there's a price floor or price ceiling, it means that you're not going to have any sort of problems reaching equilibrium. That might be, for an example, if the minimum wage is $7.75, if the market price for workers is $10, it doesn't matter that the minimum wage is $7.75 because the workers are going to be earning $10 instead. So let's take a look at what the graph of an ineffective ceiling looks like. So like I just said, it's going to be set higher than where the equilibrium quantity and price is for this market. So my suggestion to you is find where that equilibrium is, and then check to see that the ceiling is not preventing, says that it's the highest that that price can go. The price doesn't want to go as high as that, it wants to stop at equilibrium. So what you should do is compare where the equilibrium is to the ceiling and know that a ceiling says no higher than that price. Now, an ineffective floor is one that is set below where your equilibrium price is. And that means that the price that is the floor is lower than what the equilibrium price in the market is. So in this case, on your graph, the price is not going to fall as low as the level for the floor. It's going to stop and set at the equilibrium. Another thing that I probably should have mentioned earlier is that an example of a price ceiling might be what are called rent controls. Especially in New York City, there is something called rent control, which means that there's a legal amount that some property owners are able to raise their rents. So because of that, those buildings are highly in demand because you could pay a significantly less in rent than the building right next door. So that is something where those owners would love to raise those rent prices to be equal to the other buildings in the area, but because of whatever law existed when those buildings were built, they're unable to. Obviously, people in New York City would rather have rent control apartments because they tend to be less expensive. But the hard part is finding one of those because there isn't enough available because of the high demand compared to the low number of units, which means that we really have a shortage. So hopefully this explains a little bit more in depth to you what ceilings and floors are, and especially what effective and ineffective floors are. Good luck studying.